All right, guys, welcome back to the rebuild part of this 4L80E video. Again, we're going to be using the transmission unit repair manual, or the term, for most of the work that we're doing. And then we're also going to be referencing these parts explosions, where I've taken the numbered individual parts and created a spreadsheet of the GM part numbers that correspond to those parts for each of these sections that we'll have, right? So for every particular diagram, we'll be able to reference for this specific year what parts we have and how many we have on hand. All right, for all these pieces that we'll be doing today, right up through the pump where we left it off with the previous disassembly video. So a couple of points about what we're doing today. We're going to be using all OEM parts. So if we take a look over here, for example, we're going to be using this 274-300 GM 4L80E overhaul kit. Now, when you're doing OEM rebuilds, what we're doing in this video is bone basic white girl vanilla stock. We're not doing any modifications. We're not doing any performance improvements. We're just doing what's called for in the assembly manual, plus any service bulletins that have come out along the way, and we're going to be using whatever GM provided. Now, when you look at what GM provides in a kit like this, they give you a new filter, an AC Delco filter, and they give you new seals. The primary thing in this is new seals, new bolts, new frictions and steels. Here's another package of friction steels and O-rings. Then also in here will be gaskets for the pump, for the reverse servo, and for the valve body. Also in here will be replacement pump bolts, additional seals like for the manual shift lever. Also in here will be some miscellaneous parts. There's a filter for the valve body. Here's an additional gasket for the drain plug. So all of these things will be in here. They'll be referenced by GM part number on the bags, and that's how we'll use our reference material to identify what part that we're grabbing so that we grab the right one. We're also, so you see what you get with that. Now we're also, like I said, going to be doing it all by the book, but we're also going to be doing the kind of rebuild that's intended to get longevity. We're not after performance. We want factory specs in this video, but we want to get another 100,000 miles, another 7 years. So we'll also be replacing all of the snap rings, every snap ring, every retaining ring. Those are all worn out due to mileage, and so they're all going to be replaced. We'll also be replacing every thrust washer, every bearing assembly, right? So all that'll be replaced. Now, the one thing that we'll be using that's not GM, other than one particular part, are bushings. So bushings on this model transmission were not serviced by General Motors. So we'll be using, in a lot of cases, we'll be using bronze bushings. I like this company Durabond for that kind of stuff. They're made in the USA. These guys have been around since right after World War II, I think 1947, and they just make exact OEM specification type bushings, which is exactly what I want for what I'm doing here. And then we have some parts that we're going to have to replace because they're damaged, right? We saw in the teardown video, for example, that our reverse piston servo cover was cracked, so we got to have another one of those. You'll see as we go through here that we've got some other damaged and worn parts that we're going to be replacing. We had a spun bushing on this assembly, so that's going to force us to replace this. So we'll see all that as we go. So that's the kind of rebuild we're doing. No transgo kits, no modifications, no drilling ports, none of that. All by the book. So if that's what you're looking to learn and that's what you're looking to do, and if you want to see how things are done in a GM dealership circa late 1990s, early 2000s, I got a lot of access to retired technicians that are going to guide a lot of what the work I'm going to be showing you entails, then stick around. It'll be very interesting and you'll learn a lot, and it'll save you a lot of time and effort if you're doing your own. So let's get into it. All right, guys, another book that we're going to be using will be the service manual, in addition to the unit repair manual. And the thing that we'll get out of the service manual that's of use is it'll have these same parts explosions with the same legend of what the parts are and using the exact same numbering as the ones I printed out from the online GM parts ordering system but it'll also have some other pictures in here that we might find useful. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. So each of the clutches broken out in a little bit more detail than the big blow-ups that we'll find handy in putting stuff together and making sure we get things in the right order, particularly these larger assemblies like the center support and gear unit assembly. But also it's got a good reference here on the different output shafts. Right, there are different ones for four-wheel drive, standard duty, heavy duty, two-wheel drive. It's good to have some reference for that. And then here, even though these bushings are not serviced, like I mentioned, there's a good blow-up here of the entire assembly with all of these bushings throughout the unit, as well as roller clutches and sprags are shown here as well, and it helps you identify the location in the assembled perspective. There's also a similar view of all of the seals located in the 4L80E in their position. And again, they're very handy, the numbering that we'll use in order to identify the part number to the reference of the legend. And then they continue to go through this level of detail for the pump and all of its various pieces as well. I'll put a link in the description for these kind of manuals. They've been out of print for a long time, but you can occasionally find them on eBay. Try to find the one that matches the year of your truck. If not, you can go to www.acdelcotds.com. You can pay $30 and you can get it access for the weekend online. All right, so let's get going here. So the first thing they talk about doing is transmission case inspection. I've already done that, obviously. I've gone over the whole case as part of cleaning it for cracks. We did find some scored bushings. We'll show that. Got off excess gasket material. We did check some of the threads to make sure they were in good shape. If you find one that's not, use a helicoil on this aluminum, not a time cert. Use a helicoil, just like it says here. Air checked all the fluid passages. We did that as well. We've inspected the band servo bore. We also checked the one for the reverse band as well. Checked the clutch lugs to make sure they're in good shape. All of the ring grooves, they're going to be holding those retainers that we're going to put back in later. The bolt holes for the center support. We also checked the one for the forward, or rather the fourth. The cooler connectors that we took off, we checked those as well. The vent pipe on top, we checked that. And the orifice cup plug. So there's no seal on this one on ours, but some might have this. And we've sprayed the whole thing down with brake clean, and that's why you see it kind of bagged over here. Once you get it all clean, you're going to want to keep it clean. You know, every now and then the wind's going to blow and you're going to get dust and dirt and debris on here, so you're going to want to try and keep it covered up. Now, this is not anything, like I said at the beginning, this is a kind of a GM dealership level rebuild, and they don't even do these anymore. Nowadays, if you take something in like this, the younger technicians wouldn't work on something like this. They would just swap it out with a CERTA unit, and you just get a whole new system put in. So we're going to be going through, though, a level of cleaning that is functional and mechanical, not cosmetic. So the first thing they want us to hit on this rebuild is the rear output shaft seal. So they want us to install a new output shaft seal on the back. Now we're going to skip this step because what we're also going to do is we're going to swap out the bushing. And we're going to drop out a Durabond GMT 4.4 into there. And when we get back there, you're going to see that just like the factory bushing, right, it's got these notches cut out on both sides. And it's also a single piece design, none of this kind of jigsaw puzzle type two-piece folded type of cheap-ass bushing that you would get over in import. This is made in the USA kind of stuff. So we're going to put this in first, then we'll deal with the output shaft seal. They're going to tell us to put the retaining ring in there to hold it, and then we're going to start working on the parking system components. All right, first thing we're going to get is not in the manual, and it's this line pressure port. This is where you would hook up your line pressure gauge. It's an 11 millimeter. This particular fastener is pretty corroded, so we're going to pull it and replace it. The fact that we had some trouble getting the socket on is exactly while we're replacing it. It's very difficult to get at after the transmission's installed in the vehicle. And anything like this that's corroded out like that, after almost 300,000 miles and a quarter of a century, we're just going to ditch stuff like that and replace it. So we've got a new AC Delco 865-4382 to pop in there. It comes already complete with the thread sealant. So we'll pop that in there with this 11 millimeter. I'm going to clean this out of some of that residual fluid and solvent, and then I'll roll the torque value at the bottom. right, guys, we're going to knock this case bushing out next. We're just going to take note of where the notches are on the original, because we're going to put this one back exactly in the same spot as factory. There's a couple of things about this factory bushing. You can see a couple of dimples on each side. These are not for lubrication. These are part of the line installation process that staked this into position. So we're going to knock this in from the outside in. The other thing I want to point out on this is if you look on the inside through this top access hole cover, you can see that this guy is actually not flush. He's kind of sticking out just a little bit into the case. Now I would expect something like this to be installed flush. Not sure why that is not installed flush at that time, but that's just something to note of what we found. All right, we're going to pop this out with a 53 millimeter outer disc and a 50 millimeter inner disc on our bushing driver. All right, so that's simple to remove it, guys. Now there's a little bit of lubrication residue that was sitting underneath that bushing. We'll get some solvent in here, we'll clean it up, and we'll install our new one. All right, guys, so here's our old one that we took off. All right, so you can see these staking dimples, how they kind of just make a little raised portion on the inside, and they kind of grab the aluminum. What we'll do to make up for that is we'll have a sealing type of chemical that I'll show you in a bit. We see an FM stamp here. This is probably for Federal Mogul. This is probably who the original OEM is for this particular bushing to General Motors. All right, so we can look around the interior here, and what we can see is some scoring that we can feel with our fingernail. Pretty deep scoring on this side. Nothing on the top side, but definitely on the bottom side. So this guy did need to be replaced. This one wasn't optional. All right, let's keep going. We're not going to restake this with that kind of a dimpling machine, but what we're going to do instead is use some Loctite 640. So this is a type of fastening material that would be good at keeping this guy secured as an alternative to those dimples. You don't need a lot. In fact, I probably have put too much on here, but we're going to spread this evenly all the way around before we push it in. And then let me get it lined up with the marks we have on the bottom, and I'll show you how we're going to seat it. All right, guys, I'm going to slide our adapter in. I'll show you what I'm using after we get the bushing in. I just want to make sure that she's going in straight. You'll be able to tell by the way it sound changes that you've got it seated. Then we're just going to go in here and make sure we're flush, which we are. All right, guys, so what we were aiming for on this was to get it flush, which we've done. That's what we were after. And what we put it in with this time was a 50 millimeter on the inside and a 59 on the outside to make sure that we didn't go in any further than flush. And you could have drove this in from the outside in. I chose to drive it from the inside out. And what I use for this is just a piece of pipe from Home Depot that you would use for propane or natural gas. You just have a cap on one side, and then on the other side, these things ship with little thread protectors, and that works out really good to protect the bushing driver as well. And that's all it was used to drive it in. So let's move on and get the seal in. One of the things you want to take care of when you're putting these new bushings in is to make sure you've got good fitment before you build up the whole subassembly. Right, here's the old bushing, and we can see, you know, it's not a snug fit, which is one of the reasons we're replacing it for wear and plus the scoring, but it's, you know, it goes on with very little effort, right? And if you have a lot of effort on these, they get spun out. That's the problem. So when we go to look at our new one, and we come over here, and we'll come up from on the bottom, and we'll take a look at that access hole, and we slide this guy in. I'll put a flashlight in here for you to see the problem. Hopefully you guys can see that with that light in there. You see right now, I can't get it to go in, right? I would have to force it. And you don't want to force it because this is not supposed to be an interference fit. That's what causes the bushings to get spun out of the case. We're going to have to dress up that bushing. We're going to have to hone it down and make sure we can take it down just a little bit, just a few 10,000ths or even, several 10,000ths, whatever it takes to get this guy to drop in nice and smooth and then turn nice and smooth like this. It's in about 1/8 of an inch and it turns okay. That sound you're hearing is the teeth rubbing against the flashlight. But, that's how it's supposed to be, dropped in all the way. So I'm not going to film all that because it's a lot of labor, which is exactly why GM didn't want the dealers fooling with these bushings. There's a lot of labor involved to dress them up, but I wanted to highlight that. Don't wait till you get everything put together and find out it doesn't fit. And don't ignore it and think it'll just wear on its own. You'll spin out that bushing. All right, guys, so now that we got the bushing replaced, we're going to replace the seal. We can see our old one was an 867 5517. So we'll just go into our GM overhaul kit and we will pull out that same number, right? It's kind of hard to see, but there it is. There's the number. And our same part number on our replacement here, 867 5517. And we'll put him in with a 64 and a 48 millimeter driver. Now I'm being gentle with this guy just to make sure he's seating flush all the way around. And all we're going to do now is we're going to drive him in and to the point where we can get the snap ring in. Once you got that seated flush, all right, and then just take our ring and we'll insert this guy into the groove above the seal. And that's it for that. And you can reposition it if you like. I like to kind of keep it a little centered, but that's it for this guy. All right, guys, now that we've got the shaft seal retainer ring and the seal in, let's move on to this parking system components. If you remember from the disassembly video, I did not remove 703, 704, 702, so those are all still going to be there, right? And there's also going to be a plug that's retaining all of this, but we will install 705. So we got 705 all cleaned up. I'll show you in a minute. If you did take off 701, that plug, you need to put some Loctite on it, and you can use a 5/16" rod with a plastic hammer and drive that plug back in. We're going to go proceed with the detent lever 711, rehook up the pawl actuator 710. We're going to install that over the pawl, which is 703 that we just talked about. We're going to install a new seal on that. We're going to use the same material that we used on the bushings just to ensure we got a good leak-proof seal there and it's not going to move on us. Then we'll install the manual shaft. Now in my case, the manual shaft that we had taken off, we've marked for replacement along with the seal because it was really corroded on the outside. So we're going to replace it with a new one, GM 242 33/978. This is another optional thing. This is not a must-do. This is more just cosmetic. I don't like all that corrosion. Plus, it makes it hard to get the fastener off as it gets worse and worse. So we're just going to swap that out for 708. We'll install 709, which is the pin, 707, which is the seal we just talked about, and 712, which is 712 is the nut on the end of that guy. And then after that's in, we'll pop these two bolts. This one only shows one, but our year has two 714s and a 7 onto the 713 plate to hold it all down and torque it to 18 foot-pounds. And we'll be ready to move on to the reverse band after that. All right, we got the seal we've taken out of our GM overhaul kit. And I'm going to be using a seal installer. This is an aftermarket deal. This is not a GM part, but I find it very handy. It's from BET Engineering. I'm going to use several of the components from those guys in this rebuild. I'll put that down below so you can see it. As soon as we hammer that in there, then we'll move over to the top. All right, guys. So once that's fully seated, you can see it in there. It's fully seated. We've got that in. All right, now we've got our other parts here. All right, so here's our 705 spring all cleaned up and ready to reinstall. It's going to fit on our pawl piece as soon as we get ready to do that. We've got our 711 lever all cleaned up and ready to go. And then we've got our 710 rod assembly all ready to go. And then we've got the replacement shaft 2423 3978 that we mentioned earlier, ready to go. All right, guys, I'm going to put a little bit of Dexron 6 on our shaft here, just so we don't cause our steel too much stress sliding this in. Right. Our lever, this guy's going to face towards the valve body. So we're going to get him like that. And then we're going to slide the shaft into the lower square hole. And then we're going to need to get our nut, which is part 712. Make sure you get this thing flush, right? It's got to be all the way flush to know that you've got it all the way in. And then this little groove here is what the pin is going to use to retain it when we get ready for that. All right, so now we've got this guy sitting over here, but before we kind of want him to sit on his own, we're going to take the spring, 705. I'm going to hook him right underneath here, just like that. So you can come on camera on this front side so we can see the recess that he's sitting in. All right, he just sits right in here. And then we're going to sit him up on top of this piece in the casting. And this guy's just going to rest like that. Now we got the bracket that goes on top, 713, and our 714 bolts that we've cleaned and restored like everything else. All right, this guy's going to go like this. If it's got a number cast into it like this one, it's going to be towards the rear. Let's get these these bolts started. This piece, we're going to want to get that pawl on the other side of, just like that. We'll torque these down in a moment, these 13s, but you can see how that sits right like that. And now, if we take our shift lever, we can see this guy moves, right? And so if he moves in all the way, he activates the parking pawl. And that's what we just want to make sure that everything looks like it's working correctly. All right, so we're going to torque this up later. And we'll tighten this up in a moment. But right now, we want to get our pin in. So our pin is 709. And you'll be able to tell, right? Because if you put it in too far, the pin will get stuck, right? It's only going to be able to fit in this groove like that. There he is, right? And so he's in there now. So we just need to tap him in with a hammer. So let me get the appropriate wrenches here, 15, 13. I'll tighten all this up and torque it to what we saw in the service manual. We'll tap this guy down so he's flush, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, before we get into rebuilding the center support and gear assembly, we've got some more bushings to deal with here. So if we take a look at the center support itself, this is the largest of the bushings that we're going to be doing in this project. There's There's a bushing running right down the center of this guy. And we're going to be replacing that with a Durabond 03118. And what this looks like is this. And again, you know, like the title on this video is 97 and up. The part numbers I'm showing you are specific for 97 and up. So if you have a 96 back to a 91, you can watch and get an idea of the procedure, but the part numbers are different. It takes a different bushing. So there's 2 oil passage holes here, and there's another one there. So when we push this guy out, we're going to want to take note of those. So we can see, looking down the bore here, we can see these 2 holes. I'm just going to do a mark here. There's not a lot of light in here, but you can see them right there. All right, I'm just going to do a mark on top of the flange area just so we can take note of where those are to remind us. And what we're going to do to get this guy out, we're going to put him on the press. And we're going to take probably a 36 for the inside diameter. And 39 looks, you know, kind of almost perfect, but I'm afraid a 39 might get stuck in the bore. So we'll start with a 38 on this guy. So we'll start with a 38 and a 36. Get him up on the press and press this out. Now this is probably the hardest one to install because it's so large. You don't want to get it cocked. All right, so that'll give us what we need to kind of push this out. Now we've got another one on the output shaft, right, sitting in there. And this guy we can actually feel there's like a ridge cut into it. So this is definitely one we're going to want to replace. This guy is probably what you could consider an optional one. The fluting is still very pronounced. It's almost no wear at all, but do try to always replace all of these when I come in. Now to get this guy out, we're going to use something called a blind hole puller. I'm not going to be able to push it through, so we're going to use a tool like this instead. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick the best size where we can stick the tool in compressed, right, like that, and then we'll open the tool up, and what's going to happen is these teeth are going to expand, and they're going to grab the bottom of the bushing. And then what we'll use is, we won't use the slide hammer because it's just too much work, but we'll use the press part of this, and we'll push this out like that, and then it'll be very easy to push one in using our driver set. So that's how we'll get that guy. Now on the shaft here that goes on the sun gear, there's a couple of bushings on either end, and these definitely need to be changed because you can see where the flutes used to be. And I emphasize used to be because it feels completely smooth, just barely. You have to use your fingernail to feel that there used to be a flute there. This side is even worse. We can see, I don't know, the lighting might not be that great, but near the bottom, the flute is actually gone. It's worn off through the fluting. We'll take another look at it when we get it out. Now that's going to be replaced by, and actually I guess I forgot to say, the output shaft's going to get a Durabond 862-4988. Now this is, interestingly enough, a GM number. It's an old Turbo-Hydramatic number, but it happens to fit inside here just perfectly. If you wanted to go grab that old Turbo-Hydramatic number, I'm sure it would be fine. And then for this shaft, we're going to use a pair of these 03131s, which are fluted just like the original GM ones. And again, these numbers I'm giving are for 97 and up for our ladies. They're not for 96 back to 91. Those take different numbers. All right, let's go ahead and get set up to pull all this. I'm going to try and use this setup here. Might stop a couple of times just to make sure that we've got it in the best possible spot coming out the bottom. Now you could drive this out with a hammer. It would just take a while. She's going to pop a few times as she goes through. I'm just going to stop it for a second here because I want to make sure that we don't have a size that's going to get too stuck in there. This guy here is a little snug, so he's coming out just fine. Just want to get my little plastic hammer maybe and loosen this guy up because he's going to be a little bit too snug and drop him down one size. One here that's going inside the bushing. It might be just a little bit too small and getting stuck inside the bushing, so we'll check that too. But since we're changing it out, don't really care about the bushing, just want to make sure we're not doing anything to the bore. And this will definitely ensure that is the case. Yeah, she's getting stuck inside the bushing. Yeah, so the one I want to step down is actually the 36. We'll step the 36 down to a 35. All right. Sorry, guys, we had a camera glitch earlier, so I didn't get the final push on this. But we went with our 35 and 38 in the end. And there's our original FM, which I think that means Federal Mogul. Center support bushing pushed out. Let's get the new one pushed in. All right, guys, so we got this cleaned out. And, you know, I know the light thing, it's really hard to kind of see, but you can see that there's a recess area on two sides of this. One here, and kind of trying to get the light so you can see it right there. All right, so there's two recessed areas in there. So we're not going to be able to put our sealing, our Loctite 640, just, you know, willy-nilly in here. We're going to end up running it just where we see that there's no recess. All right, so we're going to basically run it right in between the two recessed areas. Very light coat, just to give us some extra insurance about this staying put. And again, we're just going to run it down here on the bottom area. We don't want to get it anywhere around any lubrication holes. All right. Now we're ready to press in the new one. So we've also cleaned this guy up. We want to not touch the sides because we don't want to get any skin oils or anything on here. So remember, this hole here goes at the bottom. And we've got these two oil holes here that are going to line up with the mark that we made initially. And you've got some kind of wide latitude here too, right? So these holes are pretty large. Let me just show for a second. And the hole we're trying to get lined up here, you can just barely see the light, but it's probably easier to see me stick this pin through here, right? So that's the guy we want to make sure lines up with that bushing. And if that lines up and we don't cock it, we're good. In fact, I might have to lower our bar here just a little bit because I don't think I've got enough room, just slightly don't have enough room to get everything in here. But you can see here where we're using our mark to get this lined up, right? So actually we're a little bit off, so we're going to turn it like that. Just to have the best chance of having it push in right where we want it. All right, guys, what we're going to go with to drive in the new center support bushing is a 40 on the outside and a 35 millimeter on the inside. This should get us nice and flush. All right, we can do a final check of our alignment of our oil hole here, and then go ahead and seat it flush. All right, we've reached the max of our travel, so we're going to have to raise our press bar up. And then on the bottom, one last check is to make sure that our bottom oil hole is not obstructed. So for these two bushings, we're going to try using these blind hole pullers. And the technique with these, both this output shaft as well as this guy here, is we're going to try to pull them out this way. Now, this is kind of a hit or miss type of tool. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I tend to try like putting some hot air around the outside before I get going, just to kind of help expand the metal a little bit and give these guys a better chance. I don't necessarily want to fill this video with the trial and error of using a tool like this. I'll go ahead and give this a shot off camera. We'll see how it does. If it does pretty good, we'll bring you back near the end. If it doesn't work out, I'll bring you back and tell you what we used instead. All right, guys, so the blind hole puller, the cheap Chinese tool, did not work in this case. So what I had to do is resort to caveman tactics. You see I'm taking a brass hammer in here, and I'm just pounding this out in between the planetaries. Just a little bit, so that we can see a ridge here. And the reason I'm doing that is once I can see a ridge, then I can come in here and deform this bushing. Right along the seam area so that we have minimal damage. All right, so we're just going to continue to tear this off, and we're going to remove it that way. All right, guys, almost done. And again, you know, maybe the light wasn't so good here, but you can see we took the dowel and we tapped her down until we could catch the lip that you see there. See, this is the kind of jigsaw puzzle shape of the original bushing from the factory. This technique is just minimal damage to the bushing surface. We might have to hammer it a little bit more, but eventually we'll get it deformed enough where the strength of the thing will be compromised and we can remove it. That might have been it right there. There we go. Right, and so that one's out. So this way we can still extract these without causing any damage. Now we'll want to clean up everything because there may be some little shreds of this soft material like we see all over the bench here. Might have gotten in around the planetaries. We definitely don't want that. But the objective here is that we didn't want to have any scoring or nicking on the inside surface from any kind of tooling. All right, so that one's done. Now we're going to tackle this guy. All right, we're going to replace this guy, and again we see the FM mark, which I continue to believe is Federal Mogul for this guy. You can see the inside is heavily fluted, so you want to make sure that the replacement has those same type of X type of flutes. We're going to replace this with a 02263 from Durabond, and we're going to use the press to press it in, and instead of this jigsaw design, it'll be a single piece. All right, similar to the reaction carrier, the Chinese puller didn't grab. It's got a little bit of a defect in it, and only two of the sides are uniformly opening, which is probably the problem we had in the other one too, because that's what gets these. They don't uniformly open. It's all right. We'll resort to caveman tactics. So for this guy, very similar, we want to lift it up, and what we're going to try to do for that is I was going to try and get the lip the way it is, but I don't think it's enough. I might try that a couple more times to see if we can deform it that way. But if not, what we'll do is we'll lay something in here and we'll use the chisel as a lever. And we'll get it underneath the bushing. And we'll walk it around and we'll try to tap it up that way until we can get enough of a lip to deform it the way we did the other one. All right, the last one we have for this section is the bushings in the sun gear shaft. And the technique on this is a really long punch. Same kind of thing where we want to drive out one end. I've already started it. And to keep it from slipping, just take a brass drift. Right, you can take a brass drift and have that held in by some helper, or if you're very ambidextrous, you can hold it in yourself. But again, we're just trying to get it to a point where we can get a lip on it. And once we get a lip on it, we can just stop and go to the deform route. Right, so you guys get the idea, right? I'm not going to necessarily film this whole thing. It's very time consuming, but we're going to go ahead and deform this down until we can pull it out. All right, we got that guy out. Once again, FM marked originally. Once again, we missed the jigsaw end, so it made it a little bit harder for ourselves. But now with that out, we'll pop on a 25 inside and a 27 outside, and we can either just put this on the press or we can probably just hammer it out right here. All right, that's it. Now let's go put some new ones in here. This is going to get a Durabond 03131 replacement bushing on both ends. All right, I'm going to put our 3131 in here. You can see we've got it sitting on a bearing separator to hold the shaft. We're going to be using a 2528 to go in because we want to get it as wide as we can on here so we don't get any mushrooming. Put some of our Loctite on here. As always, for replacement bushings like this that are not meant to be serviced by GM. And then we're just going to drive it in. Both sides will be the same. We're only going to show one. And all you got to do is just make sure she doesn't get cocked going in, and she should just be easy peasy. Not a lot of pressure on this particular bushing. This one gets done flush. And to get it flushed in, I'm just going to use a slightly larger size, probably a 29. We'll flush it off, and then we'll flip it, do the other side. All right, so I decided to go with a 2530 on top because I want to make absolutely sure that I'm getting it flush without it going in. Probably could have went with this to begin with, guys. There we go. Now she's set. And now we'll do the other side. If we zoom in here, we can see we've got her with the correct indentation along the chamfered edge. We'll flip her over and we'll do the other side now. All right, guys, so you can see how we use the race inverted on the other end of the shaft to get this guy. All right, guys, we're going to put our 2263 in now. Take a little bit of brake clean to clean the interior of the part where the bore is. Just did a little bit on the outside there. Again, we're going to spread this stuff around, nice thin coat. For this guy, I'm going to be using a 55 inside and a 59 on the outside. All right, and again, we just want to take time to make sure we don't get anything cocked. Let me tell you something, these bushings are hard to come by nowadays in the supply chain woes. Some of these guys were on back order for a while. This is a 2263T. It's not even what I would normally want to use. It's a little bit more expensive. It's a Teflon coated. It's better, but you don't have to have that, and I couldn't get the standard one because of the back order situation at Durabond. All right. Press makes this kind of stuff so much easier, guys. All right, now we can go take a look, see how she's sitting, and if we need to, we can push her in just a tad more. Wipe up our excess fluid. Yeah, we'll just recess her in just a tad more, but other than that, she's done. All right, for our 862-4988 bushing, we also going to go with a 35 and a 40. Now, you know, nothing to see here pressing these in, right? Well, mostly what I want to show you on this output shaft piece here is that you get it recessed into this bevel area. It's not flush. It's supposed to be slightly recessed. All right, continuing on after the parking assembly work, we've got the low and reverse band and the thrust washer installation. So they talk about installing the low and reverse band piece, making sure that you take note of how to align it up with the two lug pins that are inside the case. I'll show you that, as well as the pin that's going to actuate it. They also talk about reinstalling this spacer here that they call a thrust washer. Now on this guy, I'm going to show you some of these. So here's our original one, so 674, just like you see in the picture here. And I've got several of these. There's several of these that you might end up using that they have different dimensions, right? And they all can be identified visually. So this 01 one can be identified because there's no markings at all on the three tabs. And the 02 one can be identified because it's got one little notch cut into one of the tabs. And the 03 can be identified because it's got two notches cut into the tabs. And if we take a look at our original one, we can see that that's what we have, right? There's a small notch cut in here. There's no notch here. And there's a small notch here. So two notches on the side is an 862-5403, right? So that's the one that we came with from the factory. If yours was scored or gouged or cut or bent or cracked or in any way needed to be replaced, I'm showing you these numbers. These are the particular parts that you play around with to get the end play right. That's why I have a set of them. On the 04 one, what you'll see is there's a single notch on one edge. See that little divot that's cut into there? And there's no marks on the others. The 05 one, you'll see there's a divot here cut into it and one here, but nothing here. And then lastly, the 06 one, we can see on the 06 one, it's got a notch or divot, whatever you want to call it, cut into each of these ears. Now you can also have a situation where these cut in and damage the case. And let me show you that situation. All right, guys, so we're going to go set this spacer in where it lives. So it normally lives right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom the camera in. I'm going to show you some minor at this point, but what could be major down the road. So you can see where one of the problems we have with this transmission, and it ended up getting this piece locked up and hitting against these ears. And you can see right here, and right here. And I'm going to get my hand out of the way so you can see it, but I'm just trying to show you kind of like which ones to look at. This is probably the easiest one to see. We're going to zoom in right down on this side. I guess let's try it like this, right? Like that. We're going to zoom in as far as we can. And you can see there's a tiny little, it almost looks like a chip on the aluminum there, cut out. And what's happened is this little guy here, and I'm going to put him right next to it. This guy has started to kind of chew at that. Now, this stage, I don't feel this is a problem that affects the case at this point, so I'm going to reuse whichever one of these AC Delco spacers, thrust washers, whatever you want to call them, whichever one of them gives me the best end play that I'm after. But if you had a situation where it had completely sheared this off, I'm going to show you a product that you can use to address that, and that's right here. So we're going to zoom out. And again, it's an aftermarket thing, but in case you have that problem, it can save you tossing the case and trying to chase a new one. And that's this aftermarket thing from Fitzall at TechPack. It's a 34270T. And basically what this is it's got longer tangs that are going to extend down past these two little round pieces that you see in the case and grab behind it because of these ears. And this is a part that you can use not just on the 4L80E, but on the Turbo-Hydramatic 400 series and the earlier 3L80s, anything on that line. And that can allow you to keep that case going instead of having to toss it. Now this one, the problem I've got here, this is a bone stock rebuild we're doing. There's no high performance going on. We're fixing the problem that led to this wear occurring in the first place. I believe we'll be able to ride with what we've got stock-wise for the life of the vehicle. But just showing that to you and calling it out. So I'm going to pull this guy out because we need to put him in with Transgel, and then we're going to reinstall him. All right, guys, when the service manual talks about using Transgel to retain it, they're just talking about getting a little bit of this on the bottom side and using it almost like a weak adhesive just to keep it from moving around in case we have to rotate the case in the holder. That's all this is. So we just do this, and we'll sit down the bottom. All right, now that we've got this selectable thrust washer installed, let's go talk about the reverse band, right? So here's our old one. This is part 657 in the diagram. Now, when we took this out in the disassembly video, nothing's broken. The tabs are, that hook into the lugs, they're reasonably okay. They're supposed to be lined up exactly. This one's slightly off, no doubt because of the problem we were having in the wear, but nothing's broken. And the friction material is all there still, just worn a little bit. And you probably could have got away with reusing it. But since this whole rebuild started because of reverse problems, we're going to go ahead and replace it. And of course, it's got a retaining ring, 643. We're going to replace that too because the idea is to replace all of the internal retaining rings. So the retaining ring is going to be a GM862 6816. And when we put these in, the openings are going to sit at the 9 o'clock position. So with the top of the transmission, there's the pan. The bottom's at 6 o'clock. It's going to be on your left. You're going to have these holes sit like that towards the 9 o'clock position. And we're going to replace that reverse band with a 242, 02, 229 band. And like I said, you probably could have got away with just leaving it be, but there's our new one compared to our old one. You can see how these are perfectly lined up. These are slightly off. That's really the only difference really about it. The friction material we can see is a lot thicker on the new one than on the old one, but the old one wasn't worn to the point where it should have been a problem. So like I said, it's subjective. It's kind of like replacing a brake pad in the sense that you've got this and then you've got the drum that it's going to grab, which is very similar to saying pads and rotors or shoes and drums. In this case, we're just going to replace this. We're going to end up reusing the inner drum when we come to that point. So let me show you how these pieces go in now. All right, so when we're putting this drum in, there's a couple of lugs in the case that retain it. We can see them right here, 1 and 2, right? And when we put the piece in, they're going to sit, those two that I just showed you are going to sit here and here, right? And then the pin that comes through from the reverse piston side is going to sit and grab this piece right here. And between those three contact points, that's what actuates this reverse band. So let's get this guy in there. And we just want to get it sitting on those lugs. At this point, what's important is, now again, I'm going to try to describe it, and I'm just going to pop my hand really in there real quick because it's going to block you. We want this guy resting, we want this guy resting on the lug. Can't get my hand all the way in there to block your view. And then we want to make sure that we're in a position on this side where you can see, if I can find something, let me find a small tool and I'll show you. Hold on a second. All right, so let me put this brass punch through where the reverse pin would be, and you see that guy right down there? Right? So that's where your pin would grab this drum and give it a squeeze. Right? And it would squeeze it from the top, and those two lugs on the case side would keep it from moving on that end, and that's how the whole reverse operation would work. So now all we have to do is get our retaining ring in, and we're done with this step. So I'm going to pop that out of the bag. You want to be careful that you don't damage it because it's a thin kind of ring. And then the groove for this, all right, so this ring is going to sit along this little shelf, if you will, that goes all the way around the perimeter. Right, so there's a groove here, there's a groove here, and it's going to sit in this groove underneath, right above this shelf. Now I'll get it started with the camera going. I don't know if I'll be able to get it in here and block your view. Well, no, we'll be able to do it, right? So it's going to sit at the 9 o'clock position, and it's just going to sit right on that little shelf there. All right, so now it's time to move to reconditioning the center support. And so this is something that you won't see in any kind of aftermarket kit. It's only something you're going to see in a GM kit. So in the General Motors overhaul kit, we're going to have a bolt like this. It's like this chromate kind of plated type bolt. It's not going to be a black phosphate like the original bolt, and there's a specific reason for that. So the way GM envisioned this, you can use this center support one time in a rebuild. If you end up rebuilding it again, you got to toss it and replace it. Now, I check inside the rebuild kit. You've got this. You've also got a couple little pieces of paper. This is kind of a super eye test, but basically what this is saying is whenever you're servicing the center support bolt, as well as the fourth clutch, you got to remove the old ones and throw them out, and then you got to install new clean and dry bolts from the kit, and then they tell you to make sure you use proper torque. And then there's a second set of instructions that's specific for what we're about to do. So they tell you here that this service package contains a cased center bolt. They have a number here, 8690909, and they tell you that's illustration number 25, which we'll see here very shortly. And this allows one-time reuse of the center support by getting the same level of thread interference as the production. The service bolt is a zinc chromate, like a yellow gold color, to aid identification. The current production bolt is the same length and has a black phosphate coating. You need a Kentmore service tool, which is a reamer, J39919, running about $20-25 to resize the thread on the center support before doing a reassembly, and then they refer you to the instructions for the torque and how to use the tool. They tell you if you already find this bolt, then you have to toss the center support and replace it, right? So that's the whole deal. Now, I had an opportunity to talk to some retired technicians that worked at big GM dealerships back in the day when this kind of stuff was in vogue, and they both did this procedure, although you never see it done aftermarket. It is something that's done with GM kits and in GM dealerships, at least back in the day. Nowadays, they would just swap the thing out with a Serta, and they wouldn't do any of what we're doing today. So the rebuild kit tool is a 39919, which I have here. And I'll pop the instruction set from this. I got this on eBay a long time ago. And all it is a reamer tool, right? So there's a little reamer tool in here that we'll put inside the same tool that we would use for cutting threads. And it's got this little gauge piece they call a 39.919.2, and then the reamer is a 39.919.1. And basically you take the gauge piece, if it fits, you toss the center support. If it doesn't fit, you ream it out. And then the whole deal with these bolts is, if we take a look at them, the original black phosphate bolt, a lot of times what you get in the rebuild kits is just another one of these. This guy here, it's like, somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on where we grab it. If we try to grab it on the thread area, 8.29, 8.3. The service bolt, 8.46, 8.36. Right, so it's just a hair larger, So this reamer doesn't do a whole lot. It's not anything that's going to require us to redo the threads or anything like that. And we don't even need to use any cutting fluid. In fact, it doesn't tell us to. All right, so the service manual tells you basically either if it's previously been reconditioned, then you have to replace it. We talked about that. Otherwise, insert the number 2 tool, check and see if it fits. It does not. Then you can use number 1 to ream it out. So that's what we're going to do. And basically, the instructions here just say proceed with this step if the gauge pin doesn't fit. Rotate it by hand in a clockwise direction using light pressure. Don't use a motor. Do it by hand 4 to 6 times until it bottoms out and you're done. So we're going to come over here on the center support side. Try to keep it here where we can see how much material actually comes out here while still being able to get enough clearance to turn it. I'm just going to slowly turn it in there by hand, just the way it says. 3, 4. You can see up on top here, she just came out the other side. We're done. Right? That's all there is to this procedure. So now we're just going to back it out the other way to remove it. Kind of like screwing it in and screwing it out. And then we'll clean up all this debris. And now we have it properly sized for our new bolt. All right, after we finish that reconditioning and we brake clean, blow it off with compressed air, brake clean it out, we then re-spritz it with Dexron 6 to prevent any corrosion while we're continuing on. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pop a new seal in there. So our old seal was part 690. We're going to reach into our rebuild kit and grab that particular seal. Right there he is. And then what we can do to find out, actually what part number it is, we can go consult our diagram. And we can see that on the center support, let's see right here, 690, right there's the seal we're looking for. We can see that 690 is 242.03.511. And we can see on our package 242.03.511. And just to make sure that we're keeping track of what we use, we can put a little mark there that we have used that seal. Right, so this guy is going to go in on this side, right, like that. He's going to sit in just like this. Right, so we're just going to get him started like that, and then what I'm going to do is probably just use like a punch like this to finish him off. Get him seated. So I'm going to have to block your view for a moment. Right, but as soon as I can see that he's gone all the way in, then I'll know he is seated. And once we finish this, we'll pick it up with the lip seals. Okay, with our seal in, nice and flush, where you want to make sure that it's not going to be in the way when you're trying to install it. Now we're going to move on to putting the seals back on this piston. So we're going to take 636, all cleaned up and restored. And these are our originals, 637 and 38 were the 2 lip seals that they're showing here, and they show you the orientation of which way the lips face and go. I'm going to use the old ones to help match up the correct ones. So we know what the part numbers are. We know that we're looking, for example, this 242.02.361 for one of them, but these kind of rebuild kits, they don't number the individual seals. I don't think, anyway. We'll see when we get in here. I think they're more concerned with labeling that they're made in Mexico than they are with putting the part number on it. All right, so we know it's not that. We know it's not that. And so looks like it's this guy and this guy. Right, so there's our new seals. So I'm satisfied that those are the two because the other two in the package are way too big. So all we're going to do for this one is going to take our piston. And, you know, they recommend that you hose everything down with Dexron 3, right? Now it's going to be Dexron 6. Just going to basically get this spritzed all around the outside and the inside. It's going to help us get the seal to sit in there. And we're going to open up our little bag that we probably should have done before we got transmission fluid all over our hands. All right, there's one. There's two. Just be careful when you rip these bags open that you don't damage the seal. All right, so now we're going to try and locate our lip. Right, so here's the thick part that sits in, and then there's the lip, the little curvy part, right? And then here is the same lip on this one. So the thick part sits in, and the lip is the little curvy part on the outside. So it tells us to put it up like this, and then we're going to put the little one inside with the lip facing up. Just like so. I'm going to run it in all the way around, make sure it's fully seated. Okay, and now it's fully seated, and there, if we zoom in, we can see our little lip is facing up, right? Right, so facing up towards the humps. And then same thing with the larger outer one. So again, they want the lip facing up. So we'll start this guy in from the outside. Then once we get these seals in, I'll show you a tool and technique to get the two pieces mounted back together, get this piston back onto the rest of the center support that we reconditioned. There we go. Seals are on. Now let's get it back put back together. And again, you can see there's the orientation of the lip on the outer side. And one more time, orientation of the lip on the inner side. So both are facing in the up direction as far as the crevice that you see, the curve, just like the picture shows, the little crevice here and here. All right, so now we're going to get our tool, and we're going to put these two pieces together, and we're going to get our spring compressor that we haven't used since the disassembly video and put it back together. All right, so the service manual talks about using a J21363 to help put the lip seal over for this piston. And we don't have that tool, but I'm going to be using another aftermarket tool from BET Performance. This guy right here is made of machined aluminum. And we're just going to pop him on top of this. You can see how this fits on here. It just goes right above the groove for the snap ring. And we're going to spritz him up with some ATF to make him nice and slick. And then in the service manual, what they talk about doing is using a feeler gauge to assist in getting the lip seal on the outer side to seat. And this tool helps get the inner one to seat. If you do use a feeler gauge, and I got one handy in case I need it, I wouldn't use anything larger than 14 thousandths, because otherwise it could start to cut into the lip seal and you'll be doing the whole thing over again. I'm going to primarily be trying to use just a generic tool here, a Lip Wizard. This is an aftermarket kind of tool. You usually get it with aftermarket kits, but you can, this transmission shop usually give them away to you for free because they have a stack of them. All right, so to get this guy on, the key is to make sure we got lots and lots and lots of lubrication. So the service manual recommends just using ATF. You can use Transgel too. But the key is just to make sure that we've got lots of lubrication to help this process. Just get it all soaked up on all sides. You cannot have too much. And then the other thing is you've got these recesses for where the springs sit in when we get this piece done, and you got to make sure they sit in these recesses that we see here on the center support. All right, so when you've got enough lubrication on this guy, hopefully the only thing you're going to be trying to seat is this outer one. I'm just going to go all the way around here as I push down evenly on this. At some point, you want to make sure you go slow and patient as you work this in. Because if you don't, you can end up messing up the seal. And if it feels like it's binding, you might have to take it out and do it again. It's also a good idea, if you've never done it before, to practice with the old seals. See, what happens is right there. You can see this part of the lip seal is stuck. That's what you want to watch out for. You get it unstuck, and it'll be flush all the way around, and you should be good. At that point, you can remove the tool. We'll get the springs mounted, we'll get the snap ring in there, and then we'll give it an air test through this port, the same way we disassembled it, to make sure that we got freedom of movement. All right, next we got to put the piston spring and retainer assembly in, 635, and retain it with snap ring 634. And again, they're going to use the Kentmore J23327-1 and a J38734. If you've got that, great. We're going to be using our own setup, which is this aftermarket gig right here. Now our original 635, you can normally reuse these, but ours was a little bent. There's like a bend in it there. You see it right here. It's kind of more pronounced, right? There's a little bend. So just, you could rebend it. I don't know if it's very subjective, right? Something that's under a lot of stress. I just decided to replace it with a 242-02976 GM replacement spring assembly. That guy just drops in right here. You want to get the springs inside the little recesses. Our replacement snap ring was a 634. And our new one is an 862-3153. Just going to get that positioned on so that when we get this guy pushed down with the tool, we'll have this guy where he needs to be. Now you got to remember on these things, you don't need a whole lot of pressure. Just takes a little bit. And because we're not using the Kentmore tool, we got a lot more fiddling around with it to get it lined up and get it where it's supposed to be. But we saved a whole bunch of money by having this. Just take our snap ring pliers. Now we located them. This tool just really gets in your way. All right, so once we see that we've got it in all the way around, right, you want to go around and make sure it is fully seated. You can give it a little bit of a squeeze with your hand. Then what you can do to try the whole thing out, so now we can come over here. We've got about 40 psi of air. We'll control how much we put in, of course. We don't want to blow out the seals. And what we want to test for is proper alignment, proper operation of this piston. Right? So now we're satisfied everything is ready to go on this assembly. And guys, I'm going to cut the first video at this point. so that we don't have it being too long. So I appreciate you watching up until this point. I'll put an end screen at the end for part 2. I'll put a link up in the upper right here so you can get to part 2, and we'll continue on with this. I hope you found this interesting. If you did and you learned something, hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.